would now like to introduce Margaret Schedel.
Thanks, everybody. This is the first time I'm giving this talk, so we'll see what happens. I figured everybody has been introducing themselves to each other a lot these past weeks, and I thought it would be fun to actually maybe engage the audience a bit more rather than just talking at you. So you should have been asked to bring your cell phones and a notebook, and you should have been given rubber bands when you entered. And those of you on Zoom, you were also given these same instructions. So yeah, we went over most of this. So I'm consider myself primarily a composer. I'm also a cellist, a programmer, and then I'm a reluctant author. I got very angry at people describing tech works that did not understand how the tech worked. And so they wrote very pretty words, but the pretty words were wrong. And I don't write particularly pretty words. This book chapter that I'm going to talk about today is kind of an exception, but mainly I describe myself more as a journalist of past art and technology than like a musicologist or critical music studies person. Blah, blah things. I self-identify as a Python script kiddie, so I'm not a great programmer, but I will find the things, and I also collaborate with programmers to do what I need to do, but I'm not like the best programmer in the world, and I collaborate with other artists, musicians, dancers, directors, doctors, scientists. That's kind of where my happy place is, working with other people, bringing sound or interactivity into their world. All right, so my research interests are mainly in computational composition, and then the early history of arts and electronic technology, the sustainability of new media, so there are a lot of pieces that can't be played anymore because they don't work. Anne was telling us about a JavaScript thing that doesn't work anymore. So luckily she had it bundled and it still does, but for me, notation solves that issue. Computational/generative arts, so not just music. Sonification, which is creating sound out of data. And these immersive, interactive, intelligent systems, so that would be some of the VR pieces that I've done, and gesture and embodied cognition, which is what this talk will be about today. I'm also very intrigued with interdisciplinarity in the academy. Those of you who are on a tenure track and are interdisciplinary, come talk to me. I will whisper all the secrets to you. And finally, intersectional feminism, in a very male, white dominated field, and think it's important to state that. So today I will be giving a talk called Cynosuric Bodies. So it's a book chapter by Susie E. Green-Matteau and myself, and Susie will be coming here next week, and we're going to be doing some work with the Connect and tracking. And it's in Routledge Press's The Body in Sound, Music and Performance Studies in Audio and the Sonic Arts. And it's about human-computer interfaces, sometimes shortened to HCI, that translate bodily movement into sound. And then we include case studies, practice-based research, and discuss both commercial and bespoke systems. In the chapter, we made sure to engage with accessibility and equity, and this is really crucial when engaging in embodied practices in particular. So, what is a cynosure? It was, Rachel had the star trails, right, in your presentation? I was like, heh heh. So, the cynosure is the ancient Greek name for the North Star or Polaris. And so in the northern hemisphere, it appears as fixed in position, and other stars seem to revolve around it. So if you do a star trail in the northern hemisphere, the stars rotate around this North Star, and it's seen as an external point for navigation. And in ancient Greek, it actually means the dog's tail, so it sort of has the embodiment like built into the word itself. So what exactly is embodiment? It is the idea that our brains are not the only site of thinking, so our bodies, our tools, and even our environment can enact knowledge. And so in Western philosophy, this was sort of seen by Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology of perception, to be the starting point of this mode of thought. But other philosophical practices did not have this sort of schism between brain and body that the West did. So today, I will be asking you to participate in what Susie and I call handography. So it's sort of hand and choreography merged together. And it fuses Laban's concept of the kinesphere. So Laban was a choreographer, developed dance notation, which is why you may have heard of his name. And the kinesphere is this imagined scaffolding that surrounds the body and holds the shape of all possible movement by and around that body. And then another choreographer, William Forsythe, decided to make these kinespheric interactions that change size, multiply, fragment, collapse, and disappear swiftly. So we are collapsing today our whole body kinesphere down to our hands. So we're shrinking the body down to the hand, and this is utilizing the concept of marking, which is popular in dance and sometimes some theatrical practices. So you reduce the movement of a routine. You can do smaller steps, lower kicks, or even substitute hand gestures for your full body motion. I'm on this side of the stage, I go over there, I turn around, right? You've seen dancers sort of do that with their hands, and you're like, what are you doing? And there have been a lot of studies about marking, and it facilitates real-time reflection, so actually doing it with a portion of your body, not just thinking of it, really helps. It saves energy, avoids strenuous movement without the mental and physical complexity involved in dancing a phrase full out. But marking has been shown, if you do about 40% of your work as marking, it's much better than doing 100% full out. So there have been really interesting studies on that. And this is a sort of Laban kinesphere, and you can see, again, those circles, right? Various parts of the body making circles like a Cynosur. Okay, so our first exercise, you're just going to use your hands. And I will say every photo, the model is Erin Lynn, and the photos are by Lina Espada. So our first exercise, we are going to... Oh, first of all, I need to say that if you can't use your hands, you should visualize them in your mind. Adjust these exercises to embrace your own abilities to gain an embodied concept of the concepts we explore. So we encourage you to translate our handography exercises to other parts of your body in adapting your cynosure to understand divergent artistic impulses. Okay, so this is our first exercise. So if you look at your hands and decide which hand will be the touched hand, hand 1, and which will be the touching hand, hand 2, you want to lightly grasp H1 with H2 so that H2's thumb is in the palm of H1, and then fold your fingers lightly over H2 thumb. Rest H2 fingers on the back or the other side of H1. Now explore what you feel when wiggling the fingers on H1 or applying pressure from H2. Try switching around your touched and touching hands, right? So your body is both touching and being touched at the same time. Lightly grasp H2 with H1 so that hand 1's thumb is in the palm of H2. Fold fingers lightly over H1, so this is just basically reversing your position. And then explore what you feel by wiggling the fingers on H2 and pressure from H1. And is it possible for you to both understand that you are touching and also being touched? Or does it flip between the two hands? Or can you actually sort of merge the touching and the being touched? I find it a lot easier when I'm still to do that. The movement distracts me. So we're just going to live in this space for a little bit. So what did you feel when you were doing this? Did you feel your skin, your muscles, your tendon, if you were pushing hard enough, your bone, warmth, intention? What happened when you increased the pressure? Was it easier or more difficult to change your perception? How would you describe the difference before you switched? Could you make a gesture that captures this difference? Could you create a sound, and then for this residency, a drawing or performance about the experience of reversing your perception between touching and being touched? Okay. So with tracking motion, there are 3 basic modalities when tracking motion with technology. So inside-in systems, sensors placed on the body to track the body, such as flex sensors. Inside-out systems, sensors that are placed on the body to track the environment, such as a HoloLens, which sort of knows where you are. And then outside-in systems, systems placed in the environment to track the body, such as the Leap, Motion, or Connect. So I was involved in a project called Instrument of Balance and Grace, which was basically both an inside-in and an inside-out system. There were sensors that measured the extension of the elbows, so taped on to the dancer, rotation of the wheels left and right, and then the height of the seat. And then we also had some external tracking to know where on the stage. And in order to work with this piece, we needed to understand how the sensors worked and what was possible with the software, and what was integral to the choreography. So the piece was written, it was composed, the choreography was done, and it was, oh, there are going to be these elements that are suddenly now interactive to the dancer. And her first gesture is to roll out on stage, and what was happening is when she rolled out on stage, her elbow was extending, and it was ringing a bell, because she's supposed to roll out on stage, reach up, and ring a bell. And so they were working really hard trying to figure out how not to ring the bell, and everyone was trying to, can we do it in the software? Can we do this? Can we change the choreography? Nothing worked, and I was sort of like, I was watching Charlene, and I was like, when you push your wheelchair, you're not retracting your elbow all the way, right? You don't go from here and push. You are bending your elbow and pushing. Yeah, I'm like, okay, for the choreography, would it be acceptable to retract your hand all the way and then ring the bell? And she was like, yeah. And so in the programming, only when you retracted your elbow all the way and then extended would the bell ring. So for disability, right, in Garland Thomas's definition, it's the attribution of corporeal deviance, not so much a property of our bodies as a product of cultural rules about what bodies should or should not do. And the final gesture in the Instrument of Balance and Grace, she literally hurls herself out of her chair and then holds it above her. And so Curtis has said she herself has greater movement and speed in her chair than any dancer, limited by movement of legs alone. And so if you can imagine that there was a system made to track the maximum speed, if an able-bodied person were in that space, you would have to reduce the speed, right? Charlene can move much more quickly in her chair than someone can who is running. So again, if you design a system for an able-bodied person, there might be someone who is going far beyond those limitations, even though you look at their body and think this person is disabled. So I think that's really important when you are designing interactive systems with the body. Another thing that very much excited me is in recent years that the body has been transformed from the universalized white heterosexual middle-class male norm to bodies, a fractured series of subjects seeking agency through multiple identifications. And these integrations with technology serve as a springboard for the development of a vocabulary of technological language through which to better understand a diverse range of bodies. So more people than ever before can create and customize interactive systems, and we do not need to design for a single sample-sized body. So here's a case study called Locus, a work by Jung-In Young, and this uses the game track that our group has been playing with. Anne has 2 of them with her. So it's a pulley system, originally made for a golf control, and it's 2 XYZ controllers, and the Z sort of pulls on you because it wants to retract. And her work bridges communication of abstract musical concepts between software design and contemporary dancer collaborations. So they worked together, the sound and the choreography, sort of to devise this work. and through this concrete object controller. And they wanted to co-opt the affordances of the restrictive motion. So they would develop improvisations, then choose moments that were interesting physically, visually, and sonically. So again, it had to work physically for the dancers, visually with these sort of tethers on the dancers, and then sonically, the result of that motion. So here's a little excerpt of that. And you'll see these little red lines, and those are the sensors. They're attached to the body, and they are making XYZ numbers into the computer, which is then translating that into sound. So those of you who are like me and are always thinking ahead might be like, we're probably going to do handography with the rubber bands now because those people had a tether that was pulling on them. So please get your rubber bands out. Start with your hands parallel. Decide which hand will be the anchor hand and which will be the dancer hand. And anchor your anchor hand, like sort of to your body, you don't have a table, and then let your dancer hand hover and dance around your anchor hand. Note your personal style of hand dancing, combinations of music and gestures, flexibility, limitations, patterns, and any mirroring from your anchor hand. Now, place one rubber band on each finger, and you're basically you're doing like this. So however many rubber bands you have, attach them to the same finger on each hand. And now, as before, start with your hands parallel, one hand anchored and the other as it dances on and around the other hand. And make sure that the rubber bands stay on your fingers, and be careful so that they don't snap or fall off or shoot off into the audience. And now notice the combinations of movements, gestures, flexibility, limitations, patterns, and anchoring from your other hand. And imagine that's your whole body being pulled back to its starting point. And if you only have 3 rubber bands, you can change which fingers you're using. How far can you stretch it without? What do you have to do to keep the rubber band on your fingers? And then you can gradually let your anchoring hand move and join. So how did you collaborate with the restrictions introduced by the rubber bands? How did the restriction affect your gesture choices, speed of motion, moments of motion, focus, breathing, perception of place, space, and time? What else did you discover once those restrictions were introduced? So the next case study is an older piece of mine called FleshLightMovement, and this was a piece by Kinesthetic Sense. So that was myself and Allison Rootberg. It was a sort of dance and technology company, and in this piece we were tracking the shadow of a dancer behind a translucent screen. So there was a light, the dancer, the translucent screen, and then a camera looking at the back of that screen, and then there was some video nonsense, and then that was on a screen. Video nonsense, that's great. So There was sort of abstract control on the bottom. There were 6 boxes, and how much of the box was covered would control effects on various tracks. But then the top had 12 boxes where bells would ring if more than 50% of them were covered. And I would also like to say, like, a lot of my pieces function as installations and then have an expert performance component, and I call them installformances. And the idea is to let someone play in that interactive system. So A, they know that it's real. They know that it's not being faked somehow. And then B, get them comfortable with how it works. So they're like, I reach up my hand and the bell rings, cool. So this is sort of what the computer saw. So 6 large boxes on the bottom and 12 on the top. And on the bottom, it was how much of it is covered would impact the sound in each box, had a different thing that it was controlling. And then on the top, it was literally 1-to-1. If more than 50% of that box is covered, then you ring a bell. So this is that piece. This is Alison Rudberg. And then the projection basically was delaying the input from the camera and then sort of making it fuzzier and fuzzier. So there's 6 delays and sort of chopped narrow. And so you get the experience again and again. So again, with this choreography, Alison needed to be aware of how she's controlling the sound, but also in time, what would that projection look like? So sometimes there would be these stacks when she would like very carefully come down to the floor, and so you would get this stack of floor to height on those 6 extra panels. So again, just more things to think about when you work in interdisciplinary technology. So when she kicks and rings the bell, people gasp a bit because they didn't ever think to do that, right? They were sitting there ringing it with their hands, but most of them didn't think to hit their head, foot over their head. So now you might know why we brought cell phones and notebooks. So you're going to take your cell phone and turn on the flashlight. And you might need to find a partner if you can't figure out how to wedge your things like I have wedged my things. So if you need to find a partner who will hold your notebook, and one of you holds the flashlight, one of you holds the notebook, and then you can both play in the space. And so I noticed when I first set this up as an installation, like little kids couldn't reach up and ring the bell. And so I had to find a space that was larger so that I had a further throw on the light so that they had more chance to get up high. So yeah, Ivan, I think we can take the lights down. It seems like everybody is now set. So position your light source so that your hands are free to cast shadows on the surface of your choice. Notice the shapes of your hands and any similarities or differences. I notice like my ring is showing up in the shadow. And then you can play with the size of your shadow by bringing your hand further and closer to the light. And I mean, we all know this intuitively that this happens, but actually really doing it makes a difference, I think. And if you have lines on your paper, you could think of, you know, how would that interact? Can you cover one hand with the other? Could you imagine triggering sounds or triggering visuals just with your hands? How small can you make your hand? How large can you make the tip of your finger? I notice some people are moving the light now around. What happens when the light moves, in addition to the hands moving? Break your system. If you had a partner, make sure that each of you is able to show your hands. So what do you notice about the shape of your hands? What are the similarities and differences between them in shape? Were you able to imagine triggers? And really think about your hand shape, dexterity, and how you could design an interactive system or interactive drawing or performance with light for yourself. Okay. Please turn off your flashlights. Oh, can we have a moment in the darkness? Aw, that's all right. So the next piece that I'd like to talk about is called 3 Once Removed, and this is created and performed by John McCallum, who is a friend of mine, and his partner Teoma Nakarto. And in this piece, they're exploring the materiality and performativity of the heart through shared touch, sound, movement, and breath. And they're using hospital-grade electrocardiogram sensors, or ECGs, in their artistic practice that they say sits at the intersection of dance, music, improvisation, and meditation with technology. The reason that they needed to use hospital-grade ECGs is a lot of the sensors that are just sold for commercial reasons don't work on darker skin. So the hospital grade ones have to, so they're more expensive, but they have people in their company, and the original ones weren't working. So they had to upgrade their sensors. So they have 4 principles regarding biosensors. So they think it's impossible for the human body to be measured in its entirety. No matter how many biosensors are used, there exists no stable, complete body to be measured in the first place. They say the bodies are continually becoming. There are complex systems of rationality that will always exceed representation. Biosensor data is not only a result of biology, it's never only a result of biology, but rather carries traces of the system design from which it was derived. So this is a lot of media artists now tracking back the history of computational art to the military, right? So we have inherited that system design that was important for the military. And the analysis of biosensor data requires an interpretation and imagination on the parts of the designers, users, and observers. So this is a piece, they have a dissected, I think it's a pig heart that they're holding. And so if you're squeamish, just a warning, there's gonna be a close-up of a heart that is in their hands. And there you can see the sort of sensors and the wires on their body. And then they also work a lot with sort of dance for the camera. So those of you who were moving your lights around, they really play with the camera. So sometimes it's focusing on their faces, sometimes their hands, and that is also part of the choreography, is choreography for the camera that then is projected. And sometimes no projection. So they also do these pieces where everyone in the ensemble is wearing heart sensors, and they try to synchronize all of their heartbeats. So this is a really interesting practice. So it's really important to note that the design of interfaces which quantify bodily movement is not neutral in any step of the process. So from choosing or building a sensor, through interpreting that data, to then displaying the data through media. So our final handography exercise involves, so you have a pulse point on your wrist, and you also have one in your thumb. So you don't want to ever take your pulse with your thumb. And what you're going to do is basically touch each pulse point on your wrist with your first 2 fingers. So start with your hands, palm facing one another in parallel and sort of reversed, and place the index or first finger or middle and second finger of one hand on the pulse point at the wrist of the opposite hands. So hands are facing opposite directions with one above the other. Feel the pulse. Now, keeping your hands in this position, tap one of your pinkies against the opposite hand in rhythm with your pulse. And if you want to get advanced, if you can feel both of them and tap, because they're not at the same time. So, did you find that rhythm constant? Did anyone else feel their heartbeat accelerate when we all giggled a little bit? Was it easy to anticipate? Were you anticipating and then saying, I can synchronize because I'm anticipating, but then if I anticipate and something happens, then I've messed it up? Did it fluctuate? It's so hard. So, great. So Susie and I sort of wrote a manifesto to conclude our chapter. So we want to center access to technology as an equity. So we challenge the disparities that have been leveraged to block technology and education regarding the workings and processes behind the making of technology, such as economic, gender, race, age, physical, and mental abilities, and the intersectionality of any or all of these. So the right to enchantment, expression, and erudition is available to all beings and should be honored. And our second point, well, there was a second part. Here it is. So we manifest a call to place humanity back into human-computer and human-human interaction as an intimate and personalized relationship, and we call on curiosity and the access to knowledge of systems along with the reimagining of them as an act of resistance to the patriarchal/hierarchical productivities of owning, selling, and limiting knowledge, tech, space, place, expressivity, methods, and practices. So our whole thing is that you need to know how your tech is working because there are a lot of sort of hidden biases in them. And when you make interactive systems, you really need to think about how many kinds of people are going to be using them and how to make it as flexible as possible. And that's what I try to do in my practice. And that is the end of my talk. Better if I stand now or stay sitting?
Whatever you feel comfortable.
I want to get up.
Okay. Need to change the camera, Elizabeth?
Questions? Oh, and someone can keep an eye on the chat. If someone chats.
So any questions from the audience? I got a question, Meg. So 2 questions actually. Question number 1, are you constantly checking out new software, new programs, new things out there that would contribute to your practice?
Yes, and I used to be really excited about it. I was telling my group now, you want to do work with a Kinect, you have to either have an old Kinect and an old computer, or now this new Kinect, and the new Kinect is not as open as the first version was. And so there were a lot of art pieces that used the Kinect because it was so open in terms of getting the data into the computer in a way that our software could understand. And they've really locked it down a lot more. And we're just like, what are you doing, Microsoft? Like, you went backwards in terms of openness and accessibility. So, yeah.
So my next question is there a piece of hardware or technology that has not been created that you're hoping that will come in your lifetime, and what would that be?
They asked me that as my one of my questions during my doctorate, like my final defense, and I was like, wireless power. We have wireless audio. It mostly works, but wireless power sure would be great because wires are a pain, except when they're tethering and helping you know where you are. No, but it'd be nice to have the option not to.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Does Bo need to go to the mic? Can we have a little bit more light in here? So you don't fall.
When you're mapping like response information through audio to like an XYZ axis, like in that piece you showed, how do you think about that? And does the way you map it have some kind of meaning in itself? And like, how do you choose how to map it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the art, is the art of the mapping. So I often work sort of devising works similar to Young, where she was like, I'm manipulating the sound, you're dancing, wow, that sound when you drop to the ground worked really well, right? And so I'll be like, cool, let's do that mapping. A lot is sort of very intuitive to like us as embodied people, like Anne's piece, a lot of that uses the tethers, very much low pitches, high pitches, and that's been actually that's been discovered to be pretty universal, low, high pitch, but interestingly, right, left, low, high is not universal. So those that grew up with like the Western system, and if you ever play piano, this is definitely low and this is definitely high, but in other cultures that is reversed. But this mapping to pitch is pretty constant, and so are you trying to reinforce the motion? Are you trying to go against the motion? I had a piece where it was tracking it was with Allison again, tracking from above, and there were sort of 9 squares, and if you went out of the bounds, these dragonflies would fly. But it was tracking sort of how quickly you were moving through the squares, in addition to a front camera that was checking on symmetry of your body. But if you moved quickly, the tempo and all the speed of the gestures of the sound would increase, and if you slowed down, it would slow down. And I found it so interesting because, 40% of dancers would be like, your piece is so hard, it's so fast. And 40% would be like, your piece is so boring. And then 20% would be like, I'm in control, finally. And those are my people. The devil people that want to be in control, yes. But it was really funny because they were like those that were always yearning to be in control of the music. They're like, I don't want to dance to this. And sometimes dance classes have percussionists that play with them, and it's the people that really got into grooves with the percussionists that then get into the groove of the sensing. But it's bizarre. And I found the same thing with instrumentalists as well. Some of them are just like, wait, I am now in control. I don't have to push distortion. I just can lean in and get a distorted sound. And yeah, it's fun. So yeah, not everybody wants to play in my playgrounds. Yeah.
Why do you think that we have to still rely on big enterprises like Microsoft and game developing hardware? And why isn't there, or is there research for open source hardware that besides Arduino and
Yeah.
Raspberry and another that are really well known?
Yeah, so the open source, we're always lagging behind the commercialism. So yes, I think at some point there will be an open source connect, but it's gonna take a while. And the best thing that we can do is get access to one of those things, like used, and learn how it works, and then be ready for the open source version. And the other thing that there was a big hue and outcry from the artistic community when Microsoft released the Connect. The Connect 2 was like really locked down. So Connect 1, very open, Connect 2, really locked down, and the new Azure is like kind of open, so they like sort of listened, but, and I think it's also just convincing, it's hard to convince someone who has a job offer to work at a tech company for $200K a year to also make some open source projects. But 3D printers are changing everything. Arduino is changing everything. Low cost computation is changing. Like, it's an exciting time, but still not good enough. And wireless power, no.
Is there a part of the body that's not being measured, that's not possible to be measured currently, but you're hoping that will eventually be measured?
A lot of people are into these brain sensors, and they work very, very slightly, but you get a lot more information, and then people use it, and they think they're doing impressive things, but they're not. So I think it would be exciting if we could get pretty decent glimpses into what our brain is doing, because it's weird because those sensors give a lot of information, but it's so noisy that it's not really that helpful. So I'm an editor of Organized Sound, and there's a famous piece by Alvin Lucier where you're doing brain sensors, and I published an article that was very controversial where they proved that Alvin Lucier's brain sensor piece never worked. But there again, that's the like, you have this person on stage with an EEG, and like there is like, it had like an A-B, like am I in like alpha wave state or not? But he pretended that there was so much more. And that again is that thing, if you sat in that installation, if you were able to be the person that's the brain waves, you might start understanding that like, wow, that did not seem at all like what I saw. So, yeah. Anyone in Zoom land question?
No.
No Zoom land question?
No. Well, thank you very much
Thanks,
for
everybody.
joining us. Thank you, Margaret.